freedom isn't always free. It comes with a cost. Sometimes you feel lost, but you only get one life, and you may as well embrace your unique vibe, taking a walk on the wild side.
Welcome to the RV Entrepreneur Podcast, the weekly show for nomads, work campers, RVers, and entrepreneurs looking to earn a living or build a business while enjoying the RV lifestyle. This week's host is Jim Nelson. Let's settle in and enjoy the RV Entrepreneur Podcast, brought to you by RV Life.
The old devil Wanderlust kept tickling his feet until at least he made a grand sweep of the hand which held the type he was distributing. Oh, hey, Jim here at RV Life, and I was just reading from Adventures of a Tramp Printer, 1880 to 1890 by John Edward Hicks. I was inspired to pick it up again because I just had this amazing conversation with a modern-day wandering wordsmith, Jeremy Brownlowe, better known as the Typewriter Troubadour. Jeremy is a poet, performer, and van lifer who has spent the past decade living on the road, creating custom poetry on a 1965 Olympia Deluxe typewriter for strangers at farmers markets, events, and festivals across the country. But he's not just out there chasing sunsets and vibes. He's also built a sustainable career as an artist and entrepreneur. In this episode, we talk about the moment he discovered poetry could pay for gas and groceries, how he balances raw creativity and the realities of making a living, and why his poems as medicine philosophy has touched so many lives. This is a poetic and practical conversation about the wild freedom and tough trade-offs of the mobile creative life, with some impromptu examples. So whether you're a word nerd, fellow wanderer, or just someone who believes in the power of art to connect us, you're going to love this one. But first, a quick pause before Jerry hammers out some spontaneous sidewalk wisdom for us.
RV Life Pro isn't just a service. It's an all-in-one solution designed to make your RV experience simpler and more enjoyable. From planning your trip with precision to maintaining your RV with ease, we've got you covered every step of the way. Don't just survive the RV lifestyle, thrive in it. Visit RVLife.com to discover more about how RV Life Pro can enhance your journey.
Jeremy Brownlowe, welcome to the RV Entrepreneur.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, fantastic. You're living the dream of so many people out there, loving life on the road as a poet. And we're going to get into all that. But first, this is technically the RV Life Entrepreneur Podcast. I got a couple questions I ask all my guests real quick, just short, get to know you. When did you first discover the RV life or van life, and how is that any different now?
So I started living on the road in 2015 when I kind of had I don't want to say nervous breakdown, but a lot of things came crashing in all at once. I was getting divorced. I was selling my house. I was really tired of working the jobs that I was working for the man, and I needed to take a soul searching road trip. So I ended up buying a little hatchback car that I felt confident could take me wherever I was going to be going. And I
Cool.
left my town of Portland, Oregon, where I had been living for 12 years, and just basically went on the road. I didn't really have too many destinations in mind. I was just letting the road take me where, it wanted to go. And along the way, I discovered my talent for writing custom poetry on a typewriter for people in public spaces. So
Cool.
I ended up financing that whole 13,000-mile road trip that took me from Portland all the way down through like Utah, Arizona, all the way through New Orleans to Georgia, all the way up to New York City, and then back through the middle of America, through Denver, Moab, all the way back to Portland, solely on the tips that I was earning as a busker writing custom poetry for people. So that gave me the keys, if you will, to start being an entrepreneur. And I quit my job where I was working at like a natural deli chain.
Mm-hmm.
And started doing poetry full time. And eventually I just decided that I was going to stop paying rent and move out of my apartment in Portland. And then I started living out of that car and made myself a full time nomad, first stopping down here in San Diego. And then I ended up purchasing a 90s era van to
Oh,
live
fun.
out and build out. So I lived out of that for about 2 years, and then I did upgrade to my current rig, which is a 2018 Ford Transit, which I built with no experience, with only a jigsaw and a
Right
drill out of a public park here in San Diego.
on.
And then that was my home for 6 years. And I bought that vehicle with 13,000 miles on it. And at present, it has about 127,000 miles on it. So
Ha.
I've taken it coast to coast from San Diego to Atlanta several times, up to Oregon a few times. And then, yeah, just making a circuit, living out of it and continuing my poetry business. And that was my main home, my main lifestyle for about 10 years straight, with just a few months here and there of like subletting or staying with family. And then up until recently, I have been living on the road, but I finally have gone backwards, I guess you could say, and have started to rent an apartment down here in San Diego, as of July 1st. So you're
Well,
catching me at a very interesting transition, I guess.
quite right, but hence the name Typewriter Troubadour. And we're going to
Hmm.
get into all that. I'm sure when most people hear the word entrepreneur, they don't immediately think about poetry. And we're going to get
Yeah.
into wearing the artist versus entrepreneur hat later. But what does being an entrepreneur mean to you?
So I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. Like I have always just been really creative, really innovative, really passionate about putting my ideas into action and just following my dream and following my intuition and following my creative path. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of trial and error. Some
Mm-hmm.
ideas work better than others, but it really does give me like just such like integrity over what I'm like offering to the world, and
Right.
it gives me freedoms, but there's a lot of sacrifices that come into it too. There's a lot of uncertainties, but being an entrepreneur is an art form in itself. It's a dance with, managing different ideas and how I put them out there. Um and it's just in my blood. Like I am a full-time entrepreneur, and not to say that I won't work for other people in the future, and maybe we can get into that later, but it really just it's just so important to me to feel like I am offering something
Right on.
to the world.
Yeah, right on. I like how you put it a dance there, and you've clearly found some moves that worked over the years. But let's go way back to the early days there. What did you think you would be doing 10 years from the day you set off on the road? Like when you first hit out there, what did you think you might be doing 10 years later?
I really had, not too many ideas, because I was kind of at like like I said, I don't want to call it like a nervous breakdown because it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that intense, but a lot of my world was crashing in on me. A lot of the things that society said
Sure.
that I needed to be happy, a wife, a house, a stable income, working in like, working for a corporation
Mm-hmm.
essentially, wasn't making me happy, and I felt tired of like giving my passions to this corporation just for them to make the big bucks on.
Right.
Um, so, like, when I left, I really just didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea that I would become the typewriter troubadour on that trip. I brought
Right.
my typewriter in order to create journal entries or write letters to friends and family when I was on the road, but I had no intention of taking it to the street. And it wasn't until I had like a very chance meeting with another poet in Flagstaff
Mm-hmm.
where I got the idea. And at first, I thought she was kind of crazy, but then I gave it a try, and it took off. And it just started with that first day where I earned like 20 bucks. I'm like, okay, I could put this in the gas tank, I can get a sandwich, and now it's my career. um
Did you have an interim plan when we hit the road? 18 years ago now, I remember pulling away with a plan for a year off. And we just bust out laughing, thinking, what are we going to do with all this freedom? And then here we are 18 years later running a community for three-legged dogs and cats and their people
Mm-hmm.
online. And if you would have asked me that back then, I would have just busted out laughing. So did you have any sort of like vision of what was going to happen? Or were you the true spirit of the troubadour, just an artist, like a free spirit? I'm going to go roam.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking to switch up the story of my life essentially, and I remember talking to a coworker being like, I don't really know what I'm gonna do for money on the road. Like, I did have a little bit of a safety net because, like I said, I sold a
Okay.
house in Oregon, so I had, a little bit of money in the bank as a safety net. But leading up to that trip, I was collecting dented cans and crushed boxes that they couldn't put on the grocery store shelf
Sure.
that the employees got for free, stockpiling this so that I would have food to eat so that I could be very frugal on the road.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember talking to a coworker and she's like, maybe you'll like go out there and you'll discover what you're passionate about. Maybe you'll discover what you're going to do next. But long story short is when I took that road trip, the intention was to have an adventure, shake up the story of my life, and heal because I just, like I said, I had many things. My whole life just crashed in on itself, and it was completely happenstance like that I wound up at a certain open mic and talked to a certain person that planted the idea. Like who knows if it was always my destiny to
Mm-hmm.
be Typewriter Troubadour and I would have done it or discovered it in a different way. But I also wonder like if I didn't take a wrong turn going out of Sedona and ended up in Flagstaff at that particular open mic, like would I even be doing what I'm doing now? Or what would I be doing instead if that didn't
Right.
happen? The other interesting thing about that original trip is I had planned on taking a travel partner with me who bailed 2 nights before we were supposed to
Huh.
leave after planning it for 2 months. So who knows what would have happened if
Right.
this person actually went with me? Would I have gone to that open mic and talked to that person if I had a friend that I would be talking with? So the road really opened up when I surrendered and let like the universe
Right.
be the guide.
Well, such is serendipity, right? And speaking of the
Mhm.
road, so I was really excited when you reached out or we got in touch because I've always admired the work of other word weaving adventurers like Hunter S. Thompson, Edward Abbey,
Mhm.
Jack London. Who were
Mhm.
some of your heroes or what provided inspiration for you to take that typewriter on the road?
Well, so I bought the typewriter so that I could write love letters to a long distance lover of mine, which was a short lived romance. And, I was really inspired by her because she was a free agent of sorts. Like, she traveled around, different cities doing different creative work and working for festivals. So she was kind of like my muse in a way. And I lived vicariously through her adventures. And then when that romance fell apart, I'm like, well, I gotta like take things into my own hands. But it's like I do like the idea and the legend of like the beat poets back in the
Mm-hmm.
day, like roaming around the country and just like being like explorers and having fun and getting their kicks. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of these people were also degenerates and alcoholics and drug addicts and womanizers, and
Yeah.
their poetry and their prose like Jack Kerouac, it's kind of drivel. Like you
Mm-hmm.
really got to like appreciate the story behind the legend of doing something like that during that time. But I don't necessarily feel like they're like, the you know, I I guess they're influential in theory to me, but yeah, like as far as like the poetry that I write for people, it's supposed to inspire good feelings, self-reflection, motivation,
Awesome.
empowerment, creativity, encouragement for them to live their truth and their dream.
Awesome.
So like a lot of people are always asking me like who are my favorite poets, and I have to admit I'm not like the most well-read poetry person. I'm mostly like inspired by the poetry of life, but
Right.
I do have like soft spots in my heart from Charles Bukowski on one
Right.
side of the raw, rugged, and real spectrum to the more spiritual philosophy. poetry of like Rumi, for
Right
example.
on. So you mentioned Kerouac. He wrote On the Road in about 3 weeks on a
Hmm.
continuous scroll of paper taped together. You
Hmm.
have an interesting format for what you call improvised poetry. What is that and how does it take shape?
So it does kind of follow some of the Jack Kerouac mentality of like spontaneous prose or first thought, best thought. So all the stuff that I create on the typewriter as Typewriter Troubadour in public spaces is created in a matter of moments. People will come up and they'll give an inspiration, whether it's a word, a subject, a theme, a piece of their story, or if they want to have like a mini like therapy session on the sidewalk. And then I'll take that essence of what they're seeking, and then I'll put it into a poem that's written in 3 to 10 minutes tops. They're usually about the length of a haiku, but they're all free form poetry. They're all raw, rugged, and real. They're not edited, and that's very different from the process of what I do in my own personal writing, which I have an archive of thousands of pages of adventure stories that happen behind the scenes of my travels that I'm currently getting a little bit more serious about curating into a body of work now that
Mhm.
I do have like an apartment that I can settle down in for at least the next 6 months.
Sure. From what I've
So
seen, they're works of art too. I mean, we're talking an actual typewriter. What's the tool you're using?
yeah, yeah. So my machine of choice these days is a 1965 Olympia Deluxe, and they're all manual typewriters. I have a couple of these machines on me actually, and I even have one tattooed on my chest. That's how
Uh-huh.
seriously dedicated I am to this very well made German machine that can take the streets, whether I'm typing in the middle of Manhattan or in New Orleans or here in my beach town of Ocean Beach in San Diego, or at music festivals. And I like using the typewriter versus like a pen and paper or typing on a computer, because it is kind of like a percussive instrument in a
Yeah.
way, and it just helps my thoughts like flow a lot different. And some people come up and they're like, just rattle off a poem off the top of your head, and I'm just like, no, I need to have the typewriter, because the typewriter is really like the channel of that like the poetry flows into. um
And the pieces I've seen, I this isn't video, but if people could envision it, it's almost like the first thing I saw was like a receipt. It's a small piece of paper. You get the keys hitting, and they're misaligned, and there's little over inking here and there. So
Mhm.
they're really kind of works of art. Would you care to give us an example?
Um, well, yeah. How about this? If you give me a word, a subject, a theme, I will type something out here in a matter of moments, and then you can fast forward,
Okay.
and we'll read the final product.
So the word that comes to mind whenever I think about why I hit the road and why I do what I do is freedom, but that comes with a lot of
Okay.
challenges. So
Yeah.
freedom comes to mind, and that involves a lot of challenges that we have to overcome.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
RV Life Pro isn't just a service. It's an all-in-one solution designed to make your RV experience simpler and more enjoyable. From planning your trip with precision to maintaining your RV with ease, we've got you covered every step of the way. Don't just survive the RV lifestyle, thrive in it. Visit rvlife.com to discover more about how RV Life Pro can enhance your journey.
All right. I have a poem.
Fantastic. That's
Would you like
amazing.
to hear it?
Listeners, you missed it. Jeremy was literally cranking out this poem live on the air on his 1960s era manual typewriter. Let's hear it.
All right. So freedom. Sometimes living the dream isn't always what it seems when you have to think beyond the boxes of society. Sometimes you're suspended in make believe, where you sacrifice what other people want you to be and question what you think you need. Freedom isn't always free, it comes with a cost. Sometimes you feel lost, but you only get one life, and you may as well embrace your unique vibe, taking a walk on the wild side to find the path that makes you feel most alive.
Jeremy, that's fantastic. How do you know me from a matter of moments, just speaking and giving you a few words, because that surmised what I encounter on a day-to-day basis and why I hit the road and why I love what I do.
Hmm.
That's
Well,
incredible.
I don't know. People sometimes ask if I'm psychic, but
Yeah.
you know, I think I feel like just like when I write the poems, I tap into like the overall like human condition and relate to it on a personal level, but then also reflect back like what what you were saying because yeah, freedom isn't necessarily always free. There are sacrifices, there are consequences for making a conscious choice not to do things that society tells you need to do,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And there is like, I mean, there is a safety net for people that choose to work the same job for 30 years.
Right.
They know what to expect. They know how much money they're going to be making. They know the percentage of the raise that they're going to get. They enjoy other people telling them what to do because it makes them feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
So the rebels of society that kind of challenge that, you know, first of all face a lot of stigma, and then
Right.
they face a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. Like a lot of people, like for the past 10 years when I was living fully on the road, I would get people coming up to me and being like, man, I envy your life, man. If I didn't have a wife and kids, if I didn't have this, if I didn't have that, I'd be doing exactly that, you know? But they don't see the dark side of
Right.
van life. They don't see that I have showered in, gyms or broken
Culverts.
showers or, they don't know the loneliness that sets in on the
Sure.
road. They don't know the challenges of having a partner or a pet or whatever on the road or the instability of being an entrepreneur. Like, some days are easier than others to make money on the streets or at a business,
Right.
but there's no 401k, there's no health insurance, and I've sacrificed so much over the past 10 years, and I've been able to have so many adventures, and I've been able to have that like street cred and pride of being like, I'm an entrepreneur. I've only made money as a poet for 10 years. Like, talk about being a glitch in the matrix. But that takes a lot of emotional labor, a lot of physical labor, and as like I'm pushing 40, like it's a lot different than when I was in my early 30s doing the van life. Like my
Right.
body has been hurting, like, and like the comforts of having a hot shower on demand where I don't have
Right.
to drive across town to go to the gym or use a broken beach shower to get clean after dark, you know like
Mm-hmm.
it has taken a toll, and that's why I'm taking at least a 6 month hiatus from being on the road and getting into this apartment to do some self-care and then to root down into the community, which I always come back to. I
Mm-hmm.
always come back to Ocean Beach, but it does feel different to be like, I actually am a resident here now,
Sure.
you know?
The discussion you're talking about comes up quite a bit. And when people hear RV entrepreneur, oh, they think it's all rainbows and unicorns and you must have a wonderful life and you get to go park in the mountains and do your work. But everything you mentioned there rings true for a lot of our listeners. I mean, there are challenges and it's for the most part worth it.
Yeah, for the most part, I would say it's worth it. I would encourage anyone to do a longer road trip, whether it's a month, 6 months, a year. I mean, I had been living full time out of various vehicles, with maybe the exception of a like 8 month on and off. Throughout that 10 years, full time. Most people they'll do it for a summer, maybe 2 years, and then
Yeah.
and then they go back to how they were living.
We've noticed
But
that quite a bit. Like you either stick with it forever, here I am 18 years later, or those people kind of drop off after a couple of years.
yeah, but there's things that RV lifers, van lifers have to do behind the
Uh
scenes
huh.
to make it work. Like, I mean, I don't see people on Instagram that are like influencers for van life I don't see them being like, this is where I'm dumping my
Right?
human waste, so like there is a behind the scenes
There
things
is
that like
indeed.
that create routines which they become normal. And to be honest, now that I'm in an apartment, I'm just like, what routines do I not need anymore, or what routines do I need to switch to now that I'm in an apartment? Because and what am I going to do with my time now that I'm not like maintaining the van life, you know?
Or moving to a safer place to park for the night.
Yeah.
So,
I will say this, like the biggest like ew as far as like the transition from van life to apartment life, which again, I just moved into
mhm.
an apartment for the first time about 3 weeks ago. And what I do not like is that I live in a busy beach town, so I
Mhm.
sometimes have to park half a mile away and then walk to my apartment.
Right. Wow.
And I'm just like, how can I leave my baby, my home on wheels alone, like half a mile away?
Are you still in the weird phase where there's like all this space and blank walls? We have a duplex that we decided to
Yeah.
rent both units out because when one flipped, we moved in and we didn't personalize it at all, but there was just so much space and it was so sterile. And, never mind the fact that it pays for itself if it's all rented out, but it was just weird after being on the road for so long.
Yeah, I have taken the past few weeks to kind of, spruce things up and use like OfferUp or Craigslist, or even find some things at like IKEA and
Sure.
Amazon. And I love decorating spaces. Like my van was so like there's not a van like it. It wasn't one of those prefab like vans that was professionally done. Like it has my soul and my character in it, so it is kind of fun to kind of do it in an apartment setting. But yeah, like I bought rugs, I've bought like some houseware, I bought a bed, and I have a record player, and then
Wow.
that's pretty much it. So there's a lot of open space, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I'm not in my cozy little cocoon.
Right. The comforts of life. So you did mention making money as a poet. I want to dive in deeper to that in a bit, but let's back up. July 2015. You were sitting on a sidewalk in Jerome, Arizona, and you wrote your
Mhm.
first poem for a stranger. What was it about that experience that made you want to have more and more of that?
So I had been a street performer or a busker.
Okay.
In high school, I would bring my guitar or my keyboard with batteries down to downtown San Diego, and I would, play on the street for like spare change and stuff. So I had been performing in cafes and bands and stuff. So inherently, I was a performer. I
Mm-hmm.
was comfortable with that. But the idea that I could, take a typewriter out and then create a piece on the fly with like a 10-minute deadline was kind of intimidating when the woman that I met gave me that idea. So I I mean, the only way that I was planning on making money during that first road trip was to bring the guitar out and sing for spare change. But I I wasn't really necessarily like the best candidate for being a street performer, because the street performers that make actual money, like musically, they're playing covers. They're playing
Yeah.
songs that everyone knows. I was playing kind of sad, existential indie rock that I wrote. So it's not like people were like necessarily like familiarized with that. So I remember pulling up into Jerome because I took a wrong turn and like ended up there, and it was like this like tiny ghost town, kind of
Mm-hmm.
had an old feeling to it, and there was a little bit of foot traffic. So I'm like, all right, well, I should bring the guitar out and try to make a few bucks or whatever. So as I was like taking the guitar out of like the overhead carrier of my car at the time, I was like, oh wait, maybe I should try the typewriter thing that lady was telling me about, because
Wow.
this is kind of like an old timey town. And hell, if I go out there and no one gets anything, no one wants a poem, or like if I'm embarrassed or anxious, then I'll just pack up and I'll leave and I'll never come back, and no one will know me because I'm a
Sure.
stranger just passing through. So there was like no like risk of like my reputation or whatever. So I ended up giving it a try, and the very first poem request was from this older gentleman, who was just trying to kill time while his wife was going around the different
Mm-hmm.
shops. and he gave me the word epiphany, and it was just such a resonant word because like it really was an epiphany like that I had between Flagstaff, Sedona, and then in Jerome, that like, here I am, I'm on the road, like I'm on some sort of route to like a new life, and just having all these realizations, like cuz before I hit the road I never even camped more than twice in my entire
Oh,
life.
wow.
So I was like intimidated about like, can I even screw together like a camp stove or a tent? Like I just like had been beaten down by like putting my passions out there in different work environments and not getting the recognition and whatever that I felt like I deserved. And I just was like really questioning my abilities. So it really was like an epiphany when I like hit the road and like slept in a truck stop for the first time and wasn't murdered or kidnapped, and then like brought the typewriter out and was like, oh my gosh, like I just wrote a poem on the spot, like in a few minutes, and this guy gave me $10. Like, oh my God, that's like half of what I would make an hour at my hourly job, and I earned it in 15 minutes or less.
Wow.
So it was a huge epiphany, and it really empowered me as an artist, especially after trying to make it as a musician, playing original music, which I spent, years and years and hours working towards, only to get paid maybe $20 if I'm lucky at a club and and like a couple free PBRs, you know. So it was really empowering to see like how I could earn money as a poet, but then also like touch people like with the poetry that I wrote. Like the next poem that I wrote that day was for this young lady who is on like a little road trip with her family, and I wrote her a poem about stars. And she was really inspired by that, and she took like a little like Polaroid of me and gave that to me as part of the tip, and then maybe $5 or whatever. And then it's just grown ever since then.
So here you are, 10 years later. How do you consistently keep that creative flow and personal touch in the poems you write? Do you ever confront burnout?
I do, and I had been experiencing that for a little while recently, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to get into the apartment to root down and explore some of my other offerings, because there's only like so much that I can personally do being in a van as a nomad with my skills. Like for example, like I said, I used to be a cook in a high-end deli, so I have the cooking capabilities. I also like teach yoga and breath work, and it's like I can't necessarily have a regular class, or
Mm-hmm.
I can't have regular private cooking clients if I'm only in town for 2 weeks at a
Sure.
time. So rooting down is opening the doors for other offerings. Um, and then I feel like that will help balance things out as far as the poetry thing. But I am feeling like a resurgence because, and this was actually a really cool story that happened, because I mean now I don't want to disclose how much I'm paying for
Sure.
rent, but you can imagine
Yeah.
it's kind of a lot.
Ocean
It's a
Beach.
big it's a big expense when you're not used to paying any rent besides gas and car insurance and stuff. Like paying any rent is a major adjustment, so I was feeling a little bit of like scarcity mindset, being like, okay, well, like I
Mm-hmm.
was living like a king on the road. I haven't checked my bank account for, going out to eat or to the movies or buying things for years because I don't have to pay rent, and I'm still working, but now that I have like an apartment bill, I gotta like show up a little bit more. So I was feeling just like a little bit in fear, and then OB, it's like a hippie beach town. It's a
Mm-hmm.
younger crowd, and they don't have like the big bucks as like some of the other places. So I, historically have not made a lot of money on the streets here, but I've also been going out onto the streets with that mentality, being like, oh, I'm not gonna be making very much money. These people, they just want to like, you know, look at the typewriter. They don't
Right.
actually want to buy a poem, and that attitude kind of blocked me from what Typewriter Troubadour is ultimately about, which is having that one on one creative connection where I get to reflect back to people like what they're experiencing on the inside that they might not have the words for. So last Sunday, I worked one of my normal farmers markets, which is a higher income crowd, and I did pretty well. And I still had some, creative stamina. So I decided to take the typewriter out to the corner where I set up for many years now in Ocean Beach, and I I made more than I have in years,
Huh.
because I went out there with a different mentality, not like I need to make this amount of money. I went out there to be like, I'm going to see what happens when I just go out there to be part of the community, to be of service and get back to like the ethos of Typewriter Troubadour.
Right.
And I had so many like beautiful conversations and connections with people, and I really saw like how like the experience and the poetry like changed a moment in their life, and then that like again fed me, and then miraculously enough that translated into like a fair financial compensation.
Right on.
So just like anything, I think like burnout is part of people's lives if they're doing something over and over and over and over again.
Right.
And certainly when I hit the road in the very beginning, I was experiencing major burnout from my job, from my marriage that fell apart, from selling my house and stuff like that. So I don't think that burnout needs to be like a bad thing. I think it's an opportunity
Hmm.
to take a pause and to like refill your gas tank, if you
Yeah.
if you will.
So tell me more about that ethos. I was reading your bio and I got to know, can you tell me what you mean by poetry saves lives? Is there a backstory there?
Well, I mean, poetry saved my life, like by hitting the road and finding that I could write poetry for people on the typewriter and make a modest living doing it. Um, it empowered me as an artist. It made me feel seen as an artist. It made me feel like I was of service to other people by writing kind of feel good poems for them. And then in turn, that was like a reminder to me. Like if I'm writing a poem for someone, like let's say they want a poem about like resilience or motivation or grief or self-love, self-care, whatever these feel-good topics are, it gives me the opportunity to reflect on what those themes mean in my own life.
Hmm.
So and like at least for me, being an artist is in my blood. I've always been creative in some way, whether it was music or poetry or entrepreneurship or cooking. And that's what really like saved my life, like when I started doing it as a kid, because I was moving around quite a bit in a military family. I'm not someone that grew up in the same town with the same friends my whole life. My life was uprooted several times, moving across country every year or two because my dad was in the military, and I just got so much medicine by listening to music or reading books, or drawing, or doing or playing music eventually. So like it's something that I'm going to do regardless if I get paid, but I also do have like standards being like, all
Sure.
right, like we need to be like, we need to retrain society not to take advantage of creatives, because creatives are going to do it no matter what, and they deserve to be treated like necessary members of society and be compensated for the energy that they're putting out there into the culture.
That's beautiful. I was reading how you call your poems medicine, and I think it's really interesting how, the art is healing for both you and the listener in music, or the reader in poetry, or the artist and the recipient who's viewing the art. It's healing for both of you. Is that what keeps you inspired to keep doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's moments like I was describing the other day that just really make me realize and remember how important it is. Like for example, one poem that I wrote on the beach the other day, I didn't get too much of a backing story, but the theme was a mother and a daughter
Hmm.
reuniting. And I wrote the poem not knowing too much of the backing story. And afterwards, the woman, revealed that it really touched her because her daughter and her were finally reuniting after they had been separated for 2 years while the mom was getting sober, and now she has 2 years of sobriety, and this relationship with the daughter is having a second chance. And she's like, I'm gonna put this poem like in my bathroom mirror so that I can look at it every day and remember, like, this is why I'm staying sober, so I can have a
Wow.
relationship with my daughter. Or like there was another poem that I wrote for a young lady at a farmer's market about sunflowers, and she's like, I want a poem about sunflowers because that's my grandma's favorite flower.
Huh.
And I didn't know anything about what the grandma's situation
Sure.
was. I didn't know if she was still alive, if she wasn't with us anymore, or whatever. But just like seeing the tears like roll down the young lady's face, like after I read it to her, was just so beautiful, because she's like, this meant so much to me because my grandma's in the hospital, and
Wow.
I'm gonna bring this poem and a bouquet of sunflowers to her because I just love her so much. And it's just like, these are two of the countless experiences that I've
I
had with
bet.
people over the past decade. And I even have I have several self-published books, but one is actually called Poetry Saves Lives, and it's a collection of feel-good self-reflection poems. And underneath each poem there is a prompt where people can write their own reflection or poem. So like, let's say
Beautiful.
the poem's about like empowerment, so underneath that empowerment poem is a prompt that says, I feel empowered when dot dot dot, and then they can write whatever they
Oh,
want.
wow. That's
um
great.
and then, now that I'm rooted here in San Diego, I lead a poetry sharing circle called Poetry Saves Lives, where people can come and read a poem that they wrote or one of their favorites in a yoga studio where we all sit in a circle. And it's
Huh.
just very like heartwarming and supportive and like community building, and just, yeah, allows poetry to be the vehicle for people to connect with themselves and others.
That's beautiful. When we first sat down, you talked about being a psychic, and I can totally see the relation to a clairvoyant, how from a few words you must have seen into quite a few souls. But you also mentioned making a living on the road, and everyone listening wants to know, how do you make money as a poet? You mentioned the farmer's market. You started on a sidewalk. I read that you do corporate events. What are the income streams you've developed as a poet?
Yeah, so I'm a man of many hats. I do all of my own like promotions, my booking. I do my tour managements, PR, my own publishing. So it started out as a street performance, and it started off very, raw, rugged, and real. Like on that very first tour, I was literally sitting on the sidewalk or like on little ledges with the typewriter on my
Hmm.
lap until I got to New York. And I'm like, I'm not going to sit on this ground. So I bought a table and chair. But, I used to have like, you know, a cardboard sign that I would write poems in Sharpie. And now it's upgraded to like an aesthetic that's very professional, that I'm very proud of, that I've put a lot of like, you know, it, trial and error experience into
Hmm.
developing. And like, I do corporate events, I do weddings, I do private parties, and yeah, it's all been a learning experience throughout the years, as far as getting these gigs and knowing like what the ballpark figures are to charge and stuff. And it's like there's lots of other typewriter poets out there now, especially with social media, and like people seeing people do it. Or I know that I've personally inspired people to like steal the idea and
Hmm.
like run with it without even telling me about it. And then I have had people that have come up and be like, hey, I saw you 6 years ago doing this and I'm doing it now too,
Hmm.
like. And so but yeah, I don't know, like, but I've also sat, back in the day, I would sit with other poets like in New Orleans. And it's just like I have a different level of professionalism than other people. Like, I have a different like etiquette, as far as like how I interact with people. And I think that largely ties into why I am able to work these
Right.
higher gigs because I'm not blowing snot rockets in between
Right.
people coming up or shit talking them like if they don't get a poem,
Or
and I'm
smoking a
also
joint or whatever. I think of all the street performers I've seen. I'm having a flashback here on Fremont Street in Vegas, but I've
oh
never
god,
seen
yeah.
someone with a typewriter. Have you done Vegas or that sort of thing?
I have done Fremont Street and I will never do it again.
I
I
hear
will
ya.
never do it again. Yeah, it's well, first of all, they have very strict rules about where and how long you
Yeah.
can perform there, but it's it's not my scene. I'll
A
just say
different
that.
crowd. I mean,
Yeah.
I have seen the performers that you're describing who between whatever they're doing, they're smoking out or who doing who knows what. And your
Yeah.
professionalism clearly shows because it's gotten you to a point where you've upgraded your van. You're now taking a hiatus in an apartment. But you do festivals, wedding, jazz shows,
Yeah.
these type of things where you book gigs. How do you find that type of work? It's a pretty unique offering. What marketing is working best?
A lot of it is word of mouth and just like showing up in public spaces like at farmers markets or on the street. There are a couple of entertainment agencies that I work with
Oh,
here in Southern California. Those gigs don't come in as much. I mostly handle my own bookings. And occasionally I'll do like wedding planner events. I don't know if that's necessarily worth my time, to show up for, a
hmm.
4 hour demo.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's like I have upgraded my booking form on typewritertroubadour.com, which makes it easier for people to come and like put in, their event details and get a quote. But, it's like it was as shocking to me as it is probably shocking to other listeners that like I'm literally flown all over the country to do events. As long as the budget can get me there
Hmm.
comfortably and I don't have to stay in a seedy motel, like I'm there for it. And also I think, like I said, there's other typewriter poets out there in the world. I mean, let's just give like a generous estimate that there's 2,000 people doing typewriter poets in
Hmm.
the entire world. But, that creates more visibility.
Sure.
It has become like a little bit of a trend to have these at like corporate events or weddings. So, the more typewriter poets out there, the more visibility I guess there will be. So, so yeah, but yeah, it's just showing up and seeing what works and then working with people as far as their budget goes and where the event is and just keeping at it, like I've checked in with a couple of other typewriter poets this year because I feel like the gigs are a little bit slow. Like I haven't had as many weddings as I have in previous years, and I think just with the economy and the political landscape things are a little bit more uncertain, so there might be like a little bit of a lull. But at the end of the day, though, my favorite way to interact with people is at farmers markets or on the street because I get to spend a little bit more time with them.
Sure.
And it's more of like the everyday person. The corporate events, the wedding events, they're extremely stressful. Like, I don't get to sit down and have like a real heart to heart with people. It is more of just like okay, give me your word. And
Yeah.
then move aside because I got to get someone else's word, and then okay, pause, no more requests because I got 20 of them that I got to do, so it's not as personable. And and that's why it is a higher stress thing, and that's why not every person is going to be able to handle that
Right.
because in a 3 hour event, you know, I can write probably about 65 short poems, and it's a lot. Like I go into like a creative blackout when
Talk
I'm doing.
about burnout. I mean, I think I can
Yeah.
imagine the market and the sidewalk being a much more impromptu. Oh, look at this guy. He's got a typewriter instead of
Yeah.
getting in line and waiting for your poem and then
Yeah.
wondering how quickly you can do it.
Yeah.
But the whole you do earn a living, which means it kind of proves the whole starving artist thing can be overcome with the right approach. So for others
Yeah.
out there with a creative, maybe musical, mobile business, what's your best advice for staying authentic to the craft while still, operating a business? Because to be successful, you are doing your own promotion and marketing. So you wear the business hat, you wear the creative hat. How do you stay authentic to the craft while also putting on, the business hat and getting things done financially?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause like I said, ultimately, I do have the entrepreneurial professional spirit. I understand that a lot of artists don't have that. So, it does take a lot of discipline, and also the other thing that I like to do is I like to outsource things that I might not have the best expertise on. Like, I'm maybe not the best graphic designer, so I'll hire people to do book covers or flyers or posters. So that way, like, the kind of creative collateral goes and creative currency gets spread out a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is a job. I mean, like I said, I'm a man of many hats. And I mean, right now in this interview, I'm not wearing one, but I do all my own web design. I do my bookings. I do my PR. Do my own design unless I hire someone else to do it. And it's just like, for me, like, I'm able to do that because I can generate passion for both sides of things. But it really is just like a commitment to honoring that creative spirit within you and knowing when you need to take a step back and maybe give an opportunity to someone else that might be able to do things a little bit easier than you. Like, it's kind of like the idea of like, okay, I feel like anyone can do anything if they have the patience and the resilience and the time to put into it. But it's like, okay, do I really want to spend 10 to 15 to 20 hours of my life trying to repair something in my van
Right.
when I can just hire someone to do it that could do it in like 2 hours?
Hmm.
Sometimes I
Yeah.
will put in the time because I want to do it myself.
Oh, I hear you.
And other times I'm like, well, I don't want to take away from the other things that I'm doing, so I'm gonna um, allow someone else to use their talents
Yeah.
so that we can all get ahead.
And do what fulfills you. If it's like me, I'll do a certain DIY project to know that I can do it and get the accomplishment of do it and that sort of thing. But in the bio you sent us, you mentioned living on the road for 10 years as a van lifer, poet, and seeker. What are you seeking? Or has that changed? And have you found it yet?
Um, well, I feel like I'm always gonna be a seeker and a dreamer and just like wanting to surrender like over the reins to the universe. I feel like life would be kind of like dull or just be like, what's the point if like I had everything like figured out? Like I really like the kind of the phrase "more shall be revealed," you know,
Mm-hmm.
because that just keeps me curious. But I know that like I'm a completely different person from in a lot of ways from who I was when I first hit the road 10 years ago to where I am now. Like I definitely have more confidence in what I'm offering to the world. I am more open to taking risks and trusting, and this apartment is having me to act in that way, in a different way, because I have to trust that like I'm going to continue to be successful as an entrepreneur and an artist even though I have rent to pay. Um and that like I can trust that like I might not even know what is coming next for me, just like I didn't know what was coming next for me when I left Portland 10 years ago. I didn't know that I was going to become a professional poet, when I left on that road trip, and I just opened my heart and kept an open mind and listened to the synchronicities that were paving the way that ultimately led me to where I am now. So who knows what will happen next? And I think that that's part of like the excitement and the adventure of life, because I can't really think of anything worse, for me at least, to be like, well, I'm going to work this job for 30 years. I'm going to live in this house for the rest of my life. I'm just going to clock in, clock out, same routine every day. And some people like that. Some people like that because again, it brings them safety and security. But I'm also a Sagittarius, so I like to have that expansion expansionness in my endeavors.
That's beautiful. Care to take us out with another poem? Maybe that first one from the sidewalk in Jerome, Epiphany?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I am working on putting together a memoir about my travels, and I do have a book called The Adventures of Typewriter Troubadour that's currently out of print because I'm redoing things, and I get to do that because I'm my own publisher. I get to call all the shots, right?
Right.
But there is a chapter in there about the very first time I ever typed a poem in Jerome. The very first word that was given to me to create a custom poem on the fly was epiphany. And just as a little bit of context, Jerome is in Arizona outside of Sedona. So there's just like a lot of beautiful, like raw red rock scenery. And it's a great place to go as a RV lifer, van lifer, or road tripper. So highly recommend you go there. But all right. So Epiphany. The pink and orange rays shined over the red rocks. I came into this town wandering, searching, hoping for some sort of sign to say I was on the road headed toward an epiphany, or at least on the right side of town.
That's beautiful. And we've already talked about the epiphany both you and the person who gave you the word had. Thank you so much for joining us. What is the best way for listeners to learn more about and see some of your work?
Well, so if you go to my website, typewritertroubadour.com, you can get connected with all my other things, but I do have an active presence mostly on Instagram and Facebook, and everything's under Typewriter Troubadour. So if you just Google Typewriter Troubadour, all the things should come up, and then you can read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of poems that I've been archiving on these social media outlets for the past decade, as as well as photos of my adventures across the country.
Fantastic. We look forward to following you and seeing where the next epiphany occurs, Jeremy. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. See you down the road.
Yeah, man, that was such a powerful conversation with Jeremy Brownlowe, the typewriter troubadour. From a soul-searching road trip in a hatchback to a decade-long career creating poems from street corners to corporate events, Jeremy's journey reminds us that the road can lead to unexpected purpose if we're willing to follow it. We talked about that grind and the grace of living as a full-time artist, the importance of building a business that aligns with your values, and the ways that handmade poetry can create real human connection in a world moving way too fast. Jeremy is living proof you don't need a polished pitch deck or fancy studio to build something meaningful. Sometimes all it takes is a typewriter, a folding table, and the courage to show up. But don't forget that bit he said about appearance and professionalism. So whether you're running a business from your rig or chasing your own creative dream, I hope this episode encourages you to embrace the detours and trust what unfolds next. And just remember,
more shall be revealed.
Ever wished you could learn more about RVing from the experts? With RV Life Masterclass, you can. Gain access to a wealth of knowledge through online courses and a resource library filled with insightful guides. Whether you're a novice RVer or a seasoned traveler, there's always something new to learn. Start expanding your RV knowledge today by visiting rvlife.com.